All right. Yeah, let's have some people coming in already. Michael, so great to see you. You prefer Michael or Mike? Which
Mike is fine. Mike is
Mike?
fine.
He already calls
Yeah.
him Mike. Oh, we're buddies already. We have chatted all about two or three times. Awesome. Well, Mike, I'm super excited about our chat. I think you have been a very vocal and very active person on social media, talking about all things AI, and you have very, very interesting points. So I'm sure a lot of people in our audience is interested in hearing your opinion and your take, all that is going on around search, SEO, AI, et cetera, et cetera. Well, first of all, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us again to one of our webinars. I'm Carlos Mesa, CEO and president of Crowd Content Media, Inc. We help brands, publishers, and agencies create amazing content at a scale. And we also bring amazing guests to our fireside chats, webinars, slash just creating great content and helping our audience to get better and stay abreast of what's going on in the industry. Today we have Mike King, thought leader in the SEO industry, being named Marketer of the Year, I think, and also
Yes.
working on an amazing book that is gonna come out soon, November. I think it's soon. Time goes by so quickly, but Mike, the science of SEO. Tell us a little bit about the book. What should we expect? What is it about? Who is it for? All that stuff.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a technical SEO book for the people that really want to level up in their technical skills. You know, if you've ever, as an SEO, said like, oh, I want to learn Python, or oh, I really want to know how search engines work, this is the book for that person. My whole goal is to kind of like demystify how search engines actually work, because the way we think of them is they're like these black boxes, and obviously Google doesn't want us to know how things work. But the reality of it is they're hiring engineers every day. What do you think they come from? Like, they don't just know computer science and then they come in and start working on things. There's like a whole science behind how search engines work called information retrieval, and there's a lot of overlap with natural language processing, and of course just general like artificial intelligence at this point. So I really wanted to dig into a lot of the research that they do as a company, and also look at, what are the best practices generally for this sort of stuff, bring all that together to say, like, here's how Google works, and contextualize a lot of the changes and show you, like, here are the technical things that they had to do in order to get to the level that they're at. And so it's a lot of like me, going through patents, going through white papers, watching videos from Google engineers, and just like condensing all of that into one book through the lens of everything I know just from an SEO perspective as well.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, and that's very interesting because I think, and you and I were talking about this before jumping on the call, that there is a lot of posts and a lot of content out there, like the ultimate guide to SEO, and do these things, and you create all this traffic, and everybody will be rich. But this goes in a very different direction than everything that is out there. So I think that's very refreshing, and I'm really looking forward to read the book when it comes out. So, and it is already, the thumbnail or the abstract is already out in Amazon. So for everybody in the audience, stay tuned. And I think highly recommended read if you are interested in the science of SEO. I think that's a great way to put it. Like all these algorithms and all the code that goes behind SEO. So that's great. But on that note, there was a post, or we know that Google change how page experience, or change this direction on page experience, and there were some people that came out in the social networks and said, oh, technical SEO is dead, and you're coming out with a science of SEO book. So what is your take on that? And I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, technical SEO is certainly not dead. I think that even if we're just talking about the things that they sunsetted, or said that they sunsetted or whatever, those are only like a small portion of what technical SEO is. And, a lot of people kind of position themselves like, oh, I'm a content SEO. But the reality is that content is technical as well, because the way that Google looks at content is through a technical lens. They're not just being like, oh, you wrote some great content, we love it, we're going to rank it. Like, no, they are breaking it down and doing a lot of math on that content to determine how relevant it is, should it rank, and things like that. And so, the idea that technical SEO is dead is it just doesn't really make any sense. And in fact, just because Google is saying like, hey, we're getting rid of these things, I think what they're really saying is like, we are not making them bespoke algorithms anymore. They are now just part of the core algorithm. And so, it wouldn't make sense for Google to suddenly be like, hey, we don't care about page speed. Like page speed is something that they fundamentally have cared about forever. Like they've built server plugins. They had like, Google Wi-Fi, Google Fiber or whatever, because they were trying to make the internet faster for people. Like they are never going to stop caring about things like page experience. So I think this idea that technical SEO is dead is it doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. And I think from my point of view, or is that makes content more important than ever, right? What they're saying is, look, you need to have good page experience. You need to have good, upload speeds like that, just table stakes to be at the table. But what really going to matter is you creating great content. That's at the end of the day, creating content that is helpful, that is unique, that is original. And of course, I have to have all these technical things around it, because otherwise people are not going to find you. But I think there was SEOs at some point might have lost their way because they focus so much maybe on the technical side, or not just how to play for the algorithm, and put too much emphasis on those things, because creating unique content is hard, right? Creating really good content is hard. So do you what do you think of that? Do you think that just kind of reinforces the concept of content being more important than ever?
I think content has always been the most important thing, and that's not to say that the technical aspects should have ever been ignored or they were less important or whatever. But I think that at the end of the day, what we are doing with SEO is giving visibility to content. So if your content was lacking in some way, like it wasn't that good, you didn't have enough, you were doing SEO content, you just weren't doing SEO. You know what I'm saying? Like for me, you always needed to be creating something that was better than what else is out there so you could rank. And the technical aspects are more just like, let's make sure it's accessible. Make sure we are saying to Google, this is important. Let's make sure that, it's built the right way so they can pull out the components of it so that they can determine how it should rank. And to really separate those things, like I get that we separate the concerns as far as like, hey, you do technical SEO, you do link building, you do content. Those things always needed to work together. And I get, again, like there's specialization because it just makes sense for how humans do things. But whenever you're lacking on any of those things, you're not going to perform.
Yeah, well said, Mike. I think I agree with you. Those three things need to complement each other and work very well, not in silos. And yeah, specializations make sense, but you need to make sure that all those things collaborate with each other. So just a reminder for everyone in the audience, and I'm horrible at this because I always forget to remind everybody that you can ask questions, and I'll try to ask the questions as we go, and also at the end. But put it on the chat, on the Q&A. I'm not a bit of sticklers about that, but yeah, I'll be checking on the chat and the Q&A to make sure we have some of your questions. Okay, so back to the topic. So people love to kill stuff and love to kill other people. So they just said, okay, we're gonna kill technical SEO. But talking about killing stuff, people are saying, oh, chat is gonna kill search as we know it, right? And you've been very vocal, and you say, I've been on record that chat, I don't think chat is gonna be the new form of search. So I want to hear more about it, and I'm sure our audience will be very interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I don't think every time you're looking something up, you want to have a conversation. You know what I mean? Sometimes you just want an answer. Sometimes you want to have multiple points of view, right? Like maybe you want to look through 5 results to see how you feel about a thing. And the modality of chat is like, okay, let me ask this, let me refine my question, let me use that to then ask more questions. You don't always have time for that, right? Like sometimes you just want a direct answer, and the featured snippet does that very well. Now, where I've kind of evolved my thinking about this a bit is when you're trying to complete like a complex task with the advent of ChatGPT plugins, like as an example, the Kayak plugin, it can do complex things. So here's an example, like with me, historically, when I've gone on vacations, I always want to go, or I've always wanted to go to a place that has like a Marriott resort and Delta flies there, right? Because like those are my loyalty programs or whatever. And so, you know, without like typically what you would have to do is perform a search on Marriott and then perform a search on Delta and then kind of merge the two ideas for yourself. And now you could just say, hey, ChatGPT, like here's my qualifiers. And it also can't be a place that I've already been to. And then it can give you that answer. And then you can say, cool, book it for me. That is a different experience. That like assistant experience, I believe more people will want for those sorts of tasks. But generally speaking, for meeting an information need, I don't think everyone wants to have a conversation every time.
Yeah, fair enough. I agree with you that not all the things that we want to search for are warrant to have a conversation. Sometimes it's just, hey, I just wanted this piece of information and I don't want to talk to anybody. So I agree with that. But have you been using Bing? Have you been probably experimenting with it? What do you think?
Bing? What's Bing? Just funny, just funny.
Yeah, fair
I,
enough.
I've played with it a few times. I mean, there's like a certain part of me that's just kind of not open to it because it feels so underhanded the way that they kind of are trying to jump ahead of Google. But the few times I play with it, it's pretty good. You know, what I really appreciate is the integration with ChatGPT and the other parts of their platform. So like in Edge, in Windows and things like that. Like that makes a lot of sense to me because it's kind of the reinvention of Clippy and all like the assistant things that they had, but it's actually really valuable, you know, because when you think about how can we improve the whole writing experience, having, you know, ChatGPT baked into Word makes a lot of sense. Whereas like typically you're like, okay, let me go to ChatGPT, generate this paragraph, bring it to wherever I write and things like that. Like that workflow is kind of silly right now. But yeah, I think there's a big opportunity in productivity for these sorts of integrations. But for search, I don't, that's not where I want it as a user, to be honest.
Yeah, and well, ChatGPT now have the browsing experience as well. Have you tried that one? What were your thoughts?
So, you know, just complete disclosure, I work with a AI plugin called AIPRM, and we've had this live crawling feature in our tool for a couple months now. And so to see it in ChatGPT is great. Like I like the way they're doing. They're basically taking the similar functionality that they have integrated with Bing and then pulling it into there. I think that's really cool. You know, that concept is called retrieval augmented generation. And, you know, one of the first companies to do it was Neeva, the search engine that's like AI first. And I really appreciate that functionality because it allows us to avoid hallucinations, which is the big problem with generative AI. Why can't I talk? Which is the big problem with generative AI right now.
Yeah, I've used it. I have the GPT Plus, and I've used the browsing. Mixed results, to be honest with you. Sometimes just you see the wheel thinking, and never comes back with the answer. And after a while, it says, "Well, I couldn't find an answer." And I'm like, "Oh, but this is disappointing." I don't know where expectations on your body is so high because everything is moving so fast. But
so
again,
fast.
in the same note of killing stuff, like, is AI gonna kill content marketing jobs?
No, it's not. I think, especially for the state that it currently is in, it's more a force multiplier than anything else, right? Like it doesn't, the output is not good enough to just be published. So you still require editorial layer. You still require, you know, just some general adjustments. It's pretty good at like incorporating keywords and things like that. But there's still just a lot of things you need to do to make content resonate with an actual person. So I don't think it's the sort of thing that like eliminates jobs. I think it changes jobs. I think it also changes the expectation of how much content a given person should be able to pump out per day, right? Like if someone historically wrote, 3 to 5 articles a day, well, now you probably expect them to do like 5 to 10 or something like that, because they can leverage these tools and get to a point where the content, like the first draft that they're getting out of them, is decent, and now you just make your adjustments. So I don't think it's the sort of thing that, at least right now, we are going to see replace jobs. In the future, maybe, but I think it's more that it replaces jobs for the content that doesn't require creativity. Like kind of like the utility content, right? Your ultimate guide to SEO, like ChatGPT can generate that, right? But when you have an original thought on something, it's not going to be that great at doing that. And trust me, I've tried. Like I've been writing this book and I've been like, all right, well, ChatGPT, can you help me out? And I'm a pretty good prompt engineer, and I never feel happy enough with the output from it that I would want to put it in a book. And so if anything, I kind of use it as like a thought partner, and I'm like, okay, how should I word this? Like, how should I think about this? What is like a sentence that can get me started, like get me out of my writer's block sort of thing. But I'm not looking at it as a replacement for me at this point.
Yeah, no, that's I agree with that. I think that we are now reclaiming some time that we're using for composition and some mundane stuff and putting it back into creativity. I think now that everybody's going to be walking around with this machine gun called AI. And look, we're humans. We want to always go through the path of least resistance. There's going to be a lot of people pumping out all these synthetic content with no really a lot of value, and really unique, original, highly opinionated, with experience and expertise content is going to become more valuable. So if anything, now smart content marketers are going to become more valuable. Do you share that that way?
100%. 100%, but I think it also raises the lowest level of acceptedness for content. Whatever, I'm wording that horribly, but like the bar has to be much higher for what you develop, right? And I think that's not just for the written word, it's also for other types of media, because now we can generate video and images, and you've got people that are impersonating Drake in The Weeknd on a song that you can't really tell the difference. And so I think that the expectation of the user is just going to get raised up pretty significantly. So, I know Rand always talks about the idea of 10x content. Well, 10x content is probably like 100x content at this point, because, the baseline is just so high because of what we can do now.
Yeah, well, and I love that you mentioned Rand, because I was going to bring him up, and I think he said something in a post a few weeks ago, where look, if you cannot write better than AI, you have no business, making that content, something around that. But yeah, I think that's the new bar, right? So, and I think really it might kill jobs of poor writers or poor content marketers, right? Because if you cannot outperform AI in with your writing and with bringing your uniqueness, then yeah, why would somebody pay if they can just use one of these AI tools? But yeah, no, I love that conversation, because I think there's a lot of fear. Of course, content marketers, writers are worried about the bots, but I think smart content marketers will know how to use it, and that leads me to a question from the audience. As a content writer, do you think I should integrate AI tools into my workflow now, or should I wait until tools become more fleshed out? What do you think, Mike?
I definitely think you should integrate them now, especially if you've got access to GPT-4. It makes a lot of sense. And what I often will say to people is that, you should be incorporating it into an existing workflow, kind of like this question says, because a lot of people are just like, cool, I've got ChatGPT, and it kind of like exists out of anything else you're doing. But it would be much better if instead, your organization was like, hey, we're going to collectively use something like AIPRM, or we're going to integrate the API directly into our CMS. So like where you're writing, you're able to generate that copy. And so I definitely recommend it. It's just going to speed up what you're doing. And it's also going to, if you get good enough at writing prompts, you're going to get a lot closer to good output than if you were just like, hey, I'm just going to talk to ChatGPT and ask it to write me an article. The better your prompt is, the better the output is.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And we have another comment / question that is relevant to this. So Anne Handley says, writing is thinking. And what about research? If you use ChatGPT to generate copy, what will you miss by the free-flowing research we used to do online?
Well, I mean, writing with ChatGPT doesn't preclude you from doing research. And in fact, to your point of being able to pull in URLs and so on, that can be a part of what you're doing. Like you can actually summarize the research to speed up that process. So it can be the sort of thing where it's like, hey, I found these 5 articles from Search or wherever you found them from, and then you're like, summarize these for me. And then you can determine whether or not, do you want to spend more time reading this so that you can pull out whatever it is that you want. So it shouldn't stop you from thinking. It should just help you get to what you want to think about a lot faster.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I also agree that I personally use writing to help me think and make clarity of my ideas. I don't think AI precludes anybody from doing that. I think it's just making sure that you're now not outsourcing your thinking to the engine, right? Let's just let the engine help you to rephrase stuff, maybe come up with some ideas, but you still need to be part of the process, the editorial process, right? I think we're now shifting a little bit more to be strategies and editors rather than just writers, right? Because the engine can do some of the writing for ourselves. We're talking about a strategy, right? It's not like, people still need a strategy on content. Like how do you think about that, Mike?
Yeah, so it's the way it's kind of working right now is like people are just with ChatGPT in isolation, just doing their own thing. And there's no consistency in how people use it. And so from my perspective, as we've been working with different organizations who are like, how do we maximize this? It's still about building the right content strategy. It's still about building workflows and governance models. It's still about selecting the right tool set that everyone is using. And also in this case, it's also about developing a prompt library so that everyone is working from the same sets of prompts. Of course, you can adjust it, alter it as you need it. But when you're thinking about things like brand, voice, and tone, it's really important that everyone is like working from the same set of stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to generate a whole lot of content that's representative of other people's like opinion of what it should be. And so when we work with brands on this, it's very much like, nah, it's not about which tools you're using yet. It's about what are we trying to do? Who's going to own what? And then how do we adjust existing workflows and your stages of governance to incorporate this stuff. So it's not just this random thing that's coming from some like random junior person or whatever. Like there's consistency across everything that we're doing.
Yeah, I agree. I think brand, voice, and tone are going to become now way more important than ever, right? Because if everybody's pulling from the same LLMs that are like, I don't know, the major 3 or 4 that are out there, everybody's going to start sounding the same very soon. So the only way to stand out in a world with a lot of AI or synthetic content is going to be having your own personality, having your own brand, voice, and tone. And I think we actually, ironically, we can use AI to help us govern that brand, voice, and tone, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't mean to keep plugging the thing I'm working on, but like AIPRM has the ability to select a brand, voice, and tone for all your content. And so anything you generate with that will have that as like a qualifier before it spits out the prompt. So I'm sure there's other tools that do similar things, but the whole idea that you're saying, okay, here's the profile of the content that I want to be generating, and then here's a series of prompts that align with that, is going to speed up everybody's work.
Yeah. So I know I'm jumping all over the place, but going back to the type of search and how search is going to evolve, we mentioned Bing and made fun of it. We talked about ChatGPT browsing. What do you think Google is going to do? So there is so much noise. So they came out with Bard. Everybody kind of made fun of it and didn't take it very seriously. Now they talked about Maggie, and I don't know. It's very at least from where I see it, it's very hard to understand where are they going and what can we expect. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, before all of this started happening, Google researched that team. They had put out a white paper where they talked about the idea of reconsidering how search would work in a large language model world. So in that case, there's no index. It's just a large language model. And they talk about the features and functionality of that. They talk a lot about like the need for citations and things like that. So I think if you look at that paper, and then there's another paper that they have where they talk about determining if something is a fact or not. And so I think if you combine those two sets of research, you get a sense of what they're probably trying to do with Project Magi, which is like build an AI first search engine. But I'm still not convinced. I mean, they may come up with something that I have no idea about that changes the world, but I'm not convinced that this is going to be the best way for search to work, because it's far more computationally expensive to do this. And again, you're still dealing with, the fact that it can get a lot of things wrong. And they don't really have complete control over what these language models are saying. So I don't know, like I'm until you show me something that is like remarkable, I don't know that this project is going to be something that like supplants core search.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's still very confusing, way above my head. And you're more literate on the technical side of it. Actually, you create a post recently about embeddings and vectors, and I thought it was very interesting. But again, way ahead, above my head. Can you give us a a 5-year-old version of what do you mean by your relevance, vectors, and embeddings?
Yeah. So the way that search engines work, they're based on what's called the vector space model. And the best way to explain that simply is like you take the keyword that someone is searching for, you turn it into a series of coordinates on a chart, like on a plot chart or whatever. And then you do the same thing with the pages. And so then the pages that are closest to that plotting of the keyword in that chart are the ones that are most relevant. So when we think of relevance, we typically are talking about it from like a qualitative perspective. You're like, oh, you've got more headings than me. You've answered more questions than me, or your content is longer or something like that, right? And that's just not what search engines do. They're converting your content into math, basically. And then they're determining like physically which of these things is closer to what the user is looking for. And so using that idea, we made this free tool using some of the open source stuff that Google makes available so that we can show people, here's your page versus what ranks in the top 10. So you can get a sense of like why you're not ranking. Is it because your content isn't relevant enough? Or is it because you don't have the authority? It's meaning you don't have the links. So it's just a good way to like have a definitive answer around relevance where we haven't had any sort of like scoring model before this.
Okay, so and then how can an SEO or a content marketer apply this concept in their day-to-day for rankings?
Sure. So like, imagine your whatever your keyword is, you're like, yeah, I'm more relevant, but then seeing that you're not more relevant makes you then say, okay, let me take a look at these pages closer and figure out what it is that they're writing about, how are they using the keywords, so on and so forth. And so it really just allows you to, take the feelings about your content out of it and then definitively know like, okay, this page is better. Let me figure out why. And I don't intend for people to just keep doing like copycat stuff because, you can get that from like Surfer SEO or whatever, and they'll tell you specifically what the keywords are. But from my perspective, is more like, cool, let's like think about this content, not just like play this complex keyword density game that people have been playing for the last, like, 5 or 6 years.
I've been asked from the audience, what is the name of the tool?
It's called OrbitWise.
Orbit. Well, or yeah. I think
I'll drop the link.
Yeah, awesome. So you have access to the chat, right? So
Yep.
thank you, Mike, for that. Okay, let's change a little bit of gears here, but still on the AI realm. What do you think of AI detectors? What did you take?
It's such a goofy series of tools because they are so likely to have false negatives and false positives. And even OpenAI's, they say that theirs is only 26% accurate. And the thing is, like, you can put in things that are not written by AI, and it'll tell you that they are. Like, for instance, the Constitution or a passage from the Bible, both come back as like 90% AI generated. And so I don't think those tools are really worthwhile. And I also don't believe that Google can do any better as far as the detection, because the reality of it is the way these things work is they mimic how we write. So how can you detect if something is fake or not, right? Because it's seen billions of relationships between words, and it's like, cool, this is the highest probability, or depending on what your temperature is set at or whatever. And then there are the concepts of like burstiness and perplexity and all that. And everyone that's writing prompts these days, or I won't say everyone, but a lot of people that are writing prompts these days are accounting for that in their prompts. So even if they got good at detecting this stuff, as soon as you train a new model, you're no longer that good. And so what I tell people is, if they ultimately care so much about this, like, for me, it's more the plagiarism that you need to care about. But if you care so much about this, what you should do is take a baseline on your authors and say, here's what they look like prior to this technology, and then here's what they look like after. If they go off their baseline, if suddenly like everything is 90% when before it was like 30% or something like that, then something's up. But at the end of the day, you got to determine, does it matter? And from my perspective, it only matters if it's plagiarized.
Yeah, and I loved your post on LinkedIn that you put the U.S. Constitution through a checker, and it came 90%. That's yeah. We have used. I think we have tested in our business at least six tools, and unfortunately, they don't. Yeah, it's hard to rely on them. And I'm with you. Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I think what matters is this content helpful? Is it unique? Is it original? Is somebody gonna really give value to it? I think people are hung up on, well, I'm paying the writer to write, and then they're using ChatGPT is kind of unfair. And I get that. You're paying for something, and then but I think people really should focus on creating just great content rather than just try to check whether it's AI or not.
Well, I think that idea is actually kind of weird, because think about, let's say you hire a designer, right? And they, build you a beautiful website that meets all your conditions and whatever. But they also will use like stock photography, right? Like it'll be like stock flat images or isomorphic images, or even just like pictures of people or landscapes or whatever. Do you think it's less valuable because they use stock photography? Typically, no, you don't. So why do we care so much about that in the term of using generative AI content? Like, I don't think that necessarily makes sense. Again, as long as it's helpful and valuable and so on and so forth, then whatever.
Yeah, maybe is a human bias where we associate effort with value, right? So we want to make sure that the effort, or like if you give your accountant, your numbers, and then you're not going to pay them less because they use Excel rather than doing it by hand. Actually, you want them to use Excel because it's probably more error proof.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think this is an evolving topic about these checkers. And I think at the beginning, people were really hung up on, I want to make sure that is human. And I look, we promote human content. We in our business, that's what we want to make sure. But not human in the fact that it's written by human, but in the fact that it's created for a human. It's created to create value and read well and all that, and help, rather than just because we have a human doing it by hand. Okay, so we digress a little bit on the on the AI side, but really interesting conversation. But we're talking about, helpful content and why AI matters, and or why checking if it is AI or not matters. But in your point of view and your experience, Mike, what creates great content? What is a great piece of content?
Yeah. I think it's far less about things like format, because that comes up a lot, like, oh, is it interactive? Is it whatever? For me, it's, does it resonate with the audience? Does it fulfill their needs? Does it give them what they're looking for? Everything else is kind of just bells and whistles after that. Like, yes, is it beautifully designed? I love that. That's great. Is it interactive? That's great. Does it have, you know, things animated? Also great. But at the end of the day, you can also read like a New York Times article and come away with that, from that, feeling like, wow, that was amazing. And it could just be words. So I think it's really about how does it connect with the audience and what they're trying to do. And obviously that's like a squishy way to think about it. And so I think what we do to try to like scale the idea of good content is add as many bells and whistles as possible, right? Like most people are like, yeah, it's got to be at least 2,000 words, and you got to use all the images and so on and so forth, because it kind of has the veneer of being good content when you just kind of take a glance at it. But you've also seen pieces like that that don't resonate and don't perform. So it's not necessarily just about format. It's really about the message, the value that the user gets, and then anything else on top of that is just icing on the cake from my perspective.
So then what's your advice, or how do you, sure you guys produce a lot of content. So where should be the focus to create that great content, right? I know you said something that helps, something that, but how can you nail that down? Not focus so much on the bells and whistles. I agree with you. It's about really the essence of the message, but how can you really nail it down?
Yeah, I think it really starts with audience research. And, we're talking about this like a business perspective. We got to figure out first, like, what are the business goals? How does that align with what the audience needs? And then that intersection is where you should be creating content. Like, what problems are these people trying to solve? And format wise, you need to figure out like which formats do they want, right? Like, let's say, for instance, you're going after Gen Z. They care more about short form video than they care about reading blog posts. Like, that's just, it is what it is. So you've got to align what the features of the content are based on what the audience wants and how that works for your business. And so for most businesses, it's typically some sort of like written content that has some sort of like video explanation that goes with it, very well designed, things like that. But again, the message itself being resonant is the most important part, because that yields all the downstream signals. It yields, better time on site, more people sharing it, more links, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think is very insightful what you said about audience research. And sometimes we just don't do that. We just take keywords, right? And then start from there. I saw a talk from Will Reynolds, and I think when I think of Will, I also think of you, because he's also very technical, right? He has a very technical approach to SEO, and he used a lot of Power BI to research the audience. And he's a big advocate of, okay, well, just try to answer the question. And he uses technology, Power BI and data research to come out with, okay, what is that my audience really are? What is the intent really behind the search query? So I think that's a great point to create great content. Is like, do you really understand your audience? And for that, you need to go beyond just the basic keyword research and, okay, what are they really looking for? Not just the keywords.
Yeah, I've always been a big proponent of the idea of understanding the user behind the visit. And so in SEO or any sort of search, really, you're starting from keywords and you're getting intent, but you're not getting like the attitudes, the interests, or the opinions of the users. And so, I've always been a big proponent of what we call like persona-driven keyword research. So starting from personas first and then mapping those to keywords. So then we have a more complete picture of who is trying to search and what they're ultimately trying to do. Because the intent can be slightly different based on your context. And so that very much informs how we build our content strategies around different sorts of concepts and keywords and so on, because again, certain formats are more resonant with certain people. And so that will then say, okay, this is the content model we want to use for this piece of content. So maybe lots of imagery, maybe lots of video, maybe not, right? It just depends on who that audience is. And so when I gave that answer before saying like, hey, audience driven, that's not just, go do some market research. Like, nah, it's like, use that as very pointed recommendations for how you should be creating that content.
Yeah. Was it you, I think, one of our conversations that you said today we're still thinking about the asset before the message, and we should flip that around and think about message and then decide the asset. That's kind of in line with what you just said about, maybe it's video, maybe it's a blog, but we're always thinking as marketers, okay, I need to create blogs, I need to create videos, and then we decide what we're going to talk about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when we talk about content marketing, most people just default to the list that you just said, like, oh, we're going to do ebooks and infographics and videos and so on. But content is anything. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, content is literally a thing inside a thing. And so you can do any number of things that are content that are typically not done that often. Like at one point, when I was running marketing for another agency, I don't know, like 10 years ago at this point, we were making like comic strips because our audience liked it, and
No way.
and it was like a short form piece of content that could drive people to us and they would share it, and it was very resonant in that respect. So, get beyond just thinking about like the 4 things that every content marketer does. I mean, I think it's obvious, like we're doing a podcast right now, which can then be repurposed into, any number of things. A transcript could be a blog post. You can use the video. You could put the audio on podcast networks, things like that. So people just need to be more mindful of what their options are rather than just defaulting to, what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Thinking about the message and then figure out what's the best medium. All right, so we're starting to get to the end, but I want to make sure that we take some questions from the audience. So do you have any tips on how to create great prompts with ChatGPT? Jesus.
Yeah, I think that a great prompt starts with context, saying like who ChatGPT needs to be, who they're talking to. Being very explicit with instructions around writing, like giving tone of voice and things like that. And then also telling it exactly what you want to write. Like, you can't just be like, hey, write me a blog post about a thing. Like, give it the headings, give it the questions you want it to answer, give it the keywords you want it to use. You're going to get something that's way closer to what you want by doing those 3 buckets of things than if you just kind of randomly tell it to do a thing.
Yeah, you know what that reminded me. So this is an eternal headache we have sometimes with clients, is that they think we're mind readers, and they goes, okay, I want to blog about X, and that's it. that's the whole. And then when the blog is finished, oh, this is not what I wanted. Well, you didn't tell me much. So I always tell clients, like, the better your instructions and your input, the best the outcome is gonna be. So you cannot expect it to be just a title, just a keyword, and then magically we read your mind, and then it's actually be as you expected, right?
Yeah, it's like they say in programming: garbage in, garbage out. Like,
yeah,
that's
exactly. And
yeah, that's it.
Yeah, no, and I think to ChatGPT the same applies, right? Like, if you want a good output, just give it really good instructions and keep prompting it, right? Keep prompting it until you get the result that you're looking for. All right. Can you repeat the 3 buckets? I don't know. What were the 3 buckets?
3 buckets.
Yeah, maybe we mentioned something about buckets and then we just forgot about it.
Hey, I forgot. Just watch the replay.
Yeah, well, there'll be a replay. We'll send you all a recording. So don't worry if you missed something. Um, do you think there are going to be legal implications with AI created content and images?
Yeah, it's already happening, as the question says. There's been a question of like whether or not you can copyright a work that was generated in these means. And based on what I read from the Copyright Office, it said you can't copyright like the individual thing, but if it's a part of a bigger thing, then you can copyright that. So as an example, let's say you made a comic book and two of the pages in the comic book were using generative AI like Midjourney or something like that, but everything else was drawn by hand. You can copyright that comic book as a whole, but you wouldn't be able to copyright those individual images. So I think it's definitely going to come up more, especially as in instances where it's very clear that something has stolen from a very specific thing. So as an example, there's a lot of instances where using Midjourney, it'll put like the artist's signature or watermark in there or whatever. And so those things are being, litigated right now. But the reality is, I don't think the law is, it's definitely not caught up to the reality of this stuff. And I also don't believe we really have lawmakers in place that understand it enough to do so. So until that changes, I think it's going to be a cat and mouse game for a while.
Yeah, I don't see how the lawmakers that we have are going to even catch up. They're still trying to catch up with the internet and social media. So man, this is and look, we are technologists, and sometimes for me it's hard to catch up because this thing is changing like every hour. Like
Yo,
sometimes I
it's
just
it's
like, yeah,
it's been really difficult. Like, so for the last few weeks, like anytime I would look at Twitter, I'm like, what? There's a new thing? What? And for me, I'm like, I want to play with it. Like, I want to know how this works. It's not just like, oh, I want to read an article about it. So when like Auto GPT came out, I was like, oh, this is one I really need to know about. So I download that. I'm starting to install it, da da da. And then something called Baby AGI comes out. I'm like, what is that? And then last night I saw something called Web GPT that came out. I'm just like, yo, I can't keep up with this stuff. It's crazy.
yeah. No, I kind of gave up. So I need to find a source that can distill all this information for me. Maybe I'll ask ChatGPT, hey, can you distill the latest news about AI?
Yeah,
Because
we need like a whiteboard Friday for AI.
oh man, it's impossible. And now there are a lot of new newsletters coming out about AI. We'll see which one is going to be the real good one because now everybody's an expert on ChatGPT all of a sudden or AI all of a sudden. So yeah, I need bigger eyes so I can roll them up a little bit more.
Nice.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. Is similar about plagiarism. So I guess a question, what are some of you prefer AI ChatGPT plugins for SEO?
For SEO. Like I said, AIPRM is one that we love. I don't use other plugins aside from that, but we've actually done a bit of a tour around like a lot of the existing tools, like Phrase, Surfer, all those different things, because they all integrated it. Market Muse integrated it as well. Or excuse me, no, Market Muse actually had their own version when it was just GPT-3, and all that stuff. It's been cool, but I actually prefer having the ability to like have my own prompts and things like that. So my preferred thing is AIPRM, and then from there we will just do like our own standard processes of like further optimizing the content.
Yeah. Okay. Jesus is asking, what are the best practices to do audience research?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at this point probably use SparkToro
Okay.
because yeah, it's a great platform that really allows you to dig into very specific audiences. Because market research, especially when you think about market segmentation, has historically been about getting access to like survey data.
Yeah.
Um, things like data from Nielsen and Experian, all those different data providers. And the problem with that is that stuff is like based on last quarter. and then you got to pay another, $10,000 to get access to this quarters, and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. And so it was always somewhat out of date and always more based on like offline activity than online activity. Whereas SparkToro is pulling from data online, allowing you to segment it and get to your audiences very quickly. So I would say use that. And then, once you've identified like different pockets of your audience, basically use all that data to write a narrative about them. Because at the end of the day, when you're doing market segmentation, it's no different than writing like reporting. Like with reporting, you're saying, okay, here's all these data points. Here's what I think happened, because you don't know, you just know what the data points say. And you're telling a narrative about like, here's what happened on your website or in your marketing mix and so on. Whereas with audience research, you're finding all these attributes, these attitudes, these statements that people have said, which you can do by reviewing all the data that you get from SparkToro, and then you're writing a narrative about that. So what I really like about SparkToro is that it cuts all that research work down dramatically. You're just doing a few different queries and looking through what's available, and then you're able to tell that story pretty quickly. So SparkToro would be my go-to for that these days.
Well, that's awesome. And I haven't personally used SparkToro, but well, is from Rand Fishkin, and for those yeah, that's a huge endorsement. That's
The
for me
name
is
you can
enough.
trust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with Rand Fishkin, but those of you that don't, he was the founder of Moz, so one of the godfathers of SEO. So anyway, check out SparkToro. I would also recommend follow Will Reynolds from Seer Interactive. He's big into using Power BI or just BI tools to do audience research. So yeah. So Mike, let's finish on this question. Let's put our crystal ball. How do you think SEO and search is going to look with everything that is going to happen in the next few years? What's your prediction of the future? How things do you think are going to evolve?
I think everything is going to be far more personal. I think it's going to be, you have like an algorithm that represents you, and then you're kind of like playing that against the algorithms that Google has, right? So it's not just like personalization as we see it, where it's like, okay, you looked at this before, or you're located here, and so on. It's going to be very granular, and so it's going to require that content be even more personalized to certain people. So rather than, let's say you've got like a beginner's guide to plumbing, right? It's not going to be that ranks. It's going to be the guide to plumbing Hamptons houses for young adults or something like that, right? And so they're going to want to put in front of you a more specific advance or answer to your question, rather than the more broad questions. There's a question in the chat about that creating echo chambers. 100%. I definitely believe like it's going to be a filter bubble problem, things like that, but it's ultimately going to yield a better search experience. So I think that's why Google's going to go more in that direction.
Yeah, and look, on the echo chambers point, I think we've been into it for a while, right? Like all the algorithms, Twitter, LinkedIn, they just serve you whatever you want to hear. Well, media has been doing it forever. Like Fox News, CNN, they're just catering to their audience, right? And they're giving them whatever they want to hear. So it's not going to get any better. Unfortunately, it's probably going to get worse. But I guess we'll have to see. But Mike, has been amazing chatting with you. I really enjoy our chats. You're a brilliant SEO person and a thought leader. So I really appreciate you coming to our fireside chat. I'm really looking forward to read your book when it comes out in November. Where can people find you, Mike?
First of all, Carlos, thanks for having me. You can find me at iPullRank.com. I'm iPullRank on all social channels. And yeah, those are great places to find me.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I've seen you very active in LinkedIn and Twitter. So please follow Mike. I personally follow him because it's very, very insightful posts. So, well, thank you very much. And thanks to our audience to sticking with us. And until the next time, Mike.
Cool.